Okay. Got some current news about cultural survival that I wanted to talk about today. And 2 articles to talk with you about. Oh, no. That should have, okay. And a required reading, okay? So, also wanted to bring your attention to this group. How many people have checked out this website yet? I've been talking about this website for the whole semester, right? Okay. So wanted to remind you that especially if you're looking for resources for your research essay, this is a great place, okay? By example, if you were doing your topic on Hawaii, they have a whole issue just on the Native Hawaiian language revival, okay? This is all on self-determination, oceans, youth. So a lot of single topics here and themes that they do. I love the quarterly. I get it. It only comes 4 times a year, yeah, but it's got some great things. Not only that, but on a regular basis, they have, let's see if they have, let's say here, values, okay. I want to say that they have regular news, but maybe that's just a Facebook kind of thing. Okay. Let's see if I can find a little bit about what I want to show with you. Let's see, learn more. I think what I'm going to have to do is search. Okay, maybe it's not in this one then. All right, just a moment. I'm going to stick with this organization, and then I'm going to put one other up there, Survival International. Okay, there we go. Okay, I think this one is going to have your campaigns. Okay, so this is a really, really interesting group that will get involved with specific campaigns. Let's see if we can find their campaigns listing. What we do, tribes. Okay, the tribes campaign, really very interesting. If you go to it, you can see Uncontacted Tribes. We talked very much about uncontacted tribes in this class. What did we say? Did we say anything about uncontacted tribes in this class? How many people are aware that they're there? Okay, you raised your hand. What do you remember?
Wasn't there that one guy that in like India or something that was like a Christian missionary that tried to like convert an uncontacted tribe or something?
That's possible. I haven't seen. Pardon?
Central Island.
Yeah?
Central Island.
Central Island. Okay. Interesting, we have other cases in the Americas. Maybe you've heard about. How many people have heard about the cases of uncontacted tribes in the Americas? Raise your hand. Okay. All right. So a number in the Amazon area, right? We have some in Paraguay, Peru, Argentina. Okay. What do we know about the topic of uncontacted tribes? So we had some gentleman talking about converting people in terms of religion, right? What else have we learned about in terms of uncontacted tribes, in terms of the news? Have you seen anything in the news?
That particular guy was killed.
Yeah?
Just because he walked in there and was like, I'm going to convert you, and they killed him.
They killed him. Okay. So can be violent, right? Contact can be violent. We have discussions about Paraguay and what they should do. And there's a lot of people that are really, really concerned. So what do you think your top concerns are for contact?
Supplanting their culture with your own.
Okay. So annihilation of their culture somehow in terms of characteristics, cultural traits. So maybe loss of cultural traits. Anything else?
Disease.
Disease. Who said that? You said that. Okay, thank you. It's hard when this is in my good ear, you know? Disease. So the number one top issue is disease. That's our first issue that we ever talk about, because any kind of contact is going to bring this issue of disease. Because why?
You don't have like vaccines and such. And, like,
Don't have the vaccines, right? Anything else?
Don't have hospitals.
Don't have hospitals, right? Different kind of medical attention, okay? Maybe also they've never had some of these diseases that we've had also. I mean, seems like they would because they're in the same environment, right? But no, like some of these diseases have been passed people to people, right? So our concern for diseases are huge because it can wipe out an entire population, right? What was our memory of what happened to Native Hawaiians on contact? How much percentage population loss did we have? Do you remember? Okay, conservative estimates, like we're ignoring a bunch of the evidence, is 90%. But what people talk about in the literature is actually 98%. So that means 98% of the total population is gone, right? Yes.
Another issue now might be that since we have antibiotics, the diseases are stronger than what they might be used to.
Even more concerning, isn't it? Because now we've been tampering with all of our diseases and producing what we call disease virulence. How many people have heard of that word? Okay, good, excellent. Okay, virulence means something that's getting stronger, right? Okay, so disease virulence is something that's happened in the world around as we've been doing things like vaccines and interacting with other kinds of species, right? Think about swine flu and bird flu and all those other kinds of things, right? Okay, so loss of cultural traits, yes. Assimilation and enculturation, that kind of thing. Disease virulence, disease problems, massive amount of death is another concern. Okay, anything else that you can think of? What else might they be vulnerable to?
It says loss of land.
Yeah, good.
Deforestation.
Loss of land. And why might that be? Maybe because we're contacting them for a reason. Maybe we want to put a road through the middle of their land, right? One of the first things that happens is, hey, who are you and where are you from, right? We talk about who we are, and where are you from becomes defining of boundaries, right? Potential boundaries that might coincide with the state boundaries or whatever claims might be around. Okay, so we've got land issues instantly. So in terms of uncontacted tribes, we've got some issues in relation to what happens next, right? So we've got over 100 tribes around the world. How many people knew that there were that many? Good, okay, very good, okay. So some interesting issues here. All right, now these are also groups that are with special campaigns with this organization, okay? Okay, so this is great topic, all right? Do you remember talking about ILO 169? How many people remember that? Okay, I think we talked about the definition of indigenous people, and we looked at what was called a working definition, right? And then we said there was this lighter definition by ILO 169. Okay, so that's something that we're talking about in there as well. Okay? All right, so two really great sites, Cultural Survival and Survival International. Now, for your reading for this week, I wanted to give you Dr. Stokes' reading, and I loaded them, both of the articles up there, and so you can access them and take a look at them. But they're both really, really, really thick. Okay, one of them's 25 pages, and the other one is let's see, it's about 11 pages, but it's got some thick statistics in it. Okay, so I wanted to be able to just instead go over this and these readings with you, okay? And then I wanted to assign this as your primary reading, okay? So this we'll take a look at for the moment, okay? Legal strategies for cultural survival and human rights. Right? They've given us a list here talking about the definition of human rights, which we also talked about, and the difficulty of defining such things. Okay? Human rights, which many countries have approved and now listed in their international agreements. Right? Right to freedom from genocide, big issue there. Right to own property. Okay? That's a new one, right? We've got the right to ancestral land and access and ownership of ancestral land that's in the UN DRIP. The right to own property is a whole nother thing. In fact, we're talking about taking that even further. Do we remember we talked about a Declaration of the Rights of Peasants? Do you remember this? Declaration of the Rights of Peasants was passed in December of just this last year, that's saying even the people that are landless have the right to land. Okay, not specified by indigenous or otherwise, okay? Right of people to self-determination. Okay, so we've got some lists of rights here. And then when we go further down, we've got an idea here about some of the possible approaches and tactics of how to go about doing that. Okay, so that's your job to take a look at. Now, I've also listed a couple of things here to talk about in terms of what's important for cultural survival. I put language down there first. Why do you think?
Communication.
Critical to have that communication, but why specific language to a specific culture? Like, this is the cultural survival of any kind of specific culture group, like the Mayagna, the Native Hawaiians. Their language is critical. Why?
There are concepts they have that can't really be translated.
Concepts can't really be translated, right? Okay, so we looked at some of the aspects of language, right? That said language is real specific, and there's some parts that just can't be translated, and it represents our worldview and our whole cultural approach, right? And concepts can't be translated, right? Here's another thing. One thing that one of the Mayagna leaders said to me that really gave me a big impact. He said, you lose your language and you've lost your identity. Wow, think about that for a minute, right? Like, if you have a special identity of Native Hawaiian or a special identity of Native Sama or whatever kind of indigenous group, right? And you lose the ability to speak the language, you lose the ability to understand the language, you're missing all of that culturally encoded aspect of the language as well, right? And so his argument was, man, you lose the language, you've lost the culture, it's gone. How many people, what do you think about that? Any thoughts about that?
I think it's true, like, have a lot of, like, Hispanic people that don't speak Spanish, a lot of people say that they're not fluent. Like, I'm half Mexican, I don't speak Spanish, people say I'm not Mexican.
We had some generations where they were told not to, yes? And it rippled into other generations affecting us, right? And now we might have parents or relatives that should be speaking Spanish, right? Never did, and now we can't get that kind of thing. So it stopped at a certain generational level, yeah? Right? So what was one of the very, very first things that happened in Native Hawaii when they had contact and there was this danger of takeover? Remember from the tribunal? 1993, we talked about it. We said, hey, man, this happened. This is the worst thing that could have happened. What was it?
They try to replace local language.
They actually said it was illegal to speak. They made it against the law to speak the Native Hawaiian language. Can you imagine that? Fascinating, right? It's against the law to speak your language. Wow. Not sure how many other cases in the world there are about that kind of prescription. Yes.
I mean, it's not really like indigenous, but I remember reading about how in like Louisiana, the Cajun culture has like basically died out because they banned like learning Cajun French in schools.
Right, and we've defined languages in a certain way as well, right? How many people know what some would call pidgin? Oh, you like fight, right?
I'm
Okay.
bad from speaking Pidgin. I'm bad at it.
Okay, but did you know that it's actually a legal dialect? Maybe not everybody knew that, right? It's slang, right? So we have certain languages that have been termed slang and other languages that have been called a dialect of sorts, right? This is actually an intermingling of a bunch of different languages, which is kind of interesting, right? Okay. So one of the first things that we do is we ban languages. So therefore, one of the first things that we need to do in restoring a culture, first things that Native Hawaiians did in the late 1960s, early 1970s, restoring the language, right? So now we had an enormous immersion program all over Hawaii. And this was one of the big benefits of going to Kamehameha schools, right? Let's see, Kamehameha schools. Okay. So we had a language immersion program that went K through 12. You could learn your entire Native Hawaiian language here. We had another strange dialect off of the Forbidden Island called the Ni'ihau, where we had only 100 first-tongue Native Hawaiian speakers. But because this group had an influence with Tahiti, they pronounce their T's and K's differently. So we have a distinct difference. How many people knew about this group, Ni'ihau? Fascinating group. It's privatized island. It was won in a gambling bet for $25,000 by a missionary, right? And when he won it, he told all the people, he said, no, you can stay. But it was his legal land, right? Only in the last, maybe 1990s, was he mandated to put together a school. This might be a surprising case for some of you. How many people are not aware of this? Okay, so put together a school for this 100 population, right? It was only K through 6, though, not that much of a demand. So we had people that aged out at grade 6 and had nowhere else to go. We started a distance program from the west side of Kauai where we did online high school for them. And then I had 3 of them that graduated come and take my classes so that we could make them into teachers. Wow, right? Okay, but again, first language was Native Hawaiian. Okay. Kamehameha Schools working on that. And so we're very, very happy that we have this immersion program with Kamehameha Schools. What do we know is the issue that Kamehameha Schools have with nation and state law? What do we know about what's going on with nation and state law with Kamehameha Schools? Does anybody remember? They had a lawsuit. Yes.
There was a kid who wasn't a Native Hawaiian.
Wasn't Native Hawaiian. Wanted to go there. They said no. This was established by Bernice Pahi Bishop, and it was dedicated just for Native Hawaiian students. And the lawsuit went forward. Why? This is a fun conversation while we put it all together. Yes? Discrimination. Yes? Why? Why? Why didn't the Native Hawaiians have a right to say, hey, no, our school is just for Native Hawaiians? Down the road at Morongo Band of Mission Indians, they have a school there, and they say, no, this is just for kids from Morongo Band of Mission Indians. How come?
Not granted the same rights as Native Americans.
No, they don't have those same rights as Native Americans. And even under state law, they're not even recognized as Indigenous people under state law. They have some kind of office that deals with Native Hawaiians, but not afforded these special kinds of characteristics that other groups all around our nation are afforded, right? That means language protection, not as easy, right? When we can guarantee all the kids can have a place here, okay. But when we've got to step back and say, no, these are only for the smart ones or from the ones that have lots of money, that becomes a different issue, right? Okay. So let's talk about the Mayagna. I want to go over the different cases that we have in terms of how we're dealing with cultural survival. Do we know anything about the Mayagna language? Okay, we have 3 dialects. I think, let's see, let's write it down. Panamahka, Yusku, known as the Lost Tribe. We thought we didn't know how to speak this. Bawika. Oh, there's more. Twaka. Ulua. Rama, sometimes included. Okay, so we've got 6 dialects. Okay, we've got 9 territories. Most can speak this one. It's kind of like speaking English, and then you can all maybe know a little bit of German, Spanish, French, or whatever. Okay, so Panamahka is the primary language. Okay. Of the Bawika, we have 5 speakers. We have a population of about 5,000 people, only 5 speakers. So we lost a lot of that information. In fact, we would maybe even call it endangered, borderline extinct. Okay. Tuaxaca, spoken on both sides of Nicaragua and Honduras. Yay, very healthy. Yes?
What is the threshold for a language becoming endangered or extinct? Because I mean, 5 out of 5,000, that sounds like very, very endangered to me.
Yeah, we don't have a measurement of endangerment other than numbers of present speakers, right? And then the next question would be, well, what's going on with those speakers, right? So for the Bawika, one of the things that we try and do for cultural survival purposes is we try and bring in funds, which we've done for the Bawika on occasion, right? Their funds went down with all of this conflict. Ugh, what a nightmare, right? But the idea was that we were going to take all of our Spanish school and put it into Bawika and teach the kids, okay? Now all the books are available here, right? Which I found when I went to meet with these people, and all the grammar books were wrong, right? So in order to get it teachable, we have to produce books, right?
And kind of to go off that, in a sense, like if the language, if there's no actual living speakers and yet the language is documented in some form of textbook, do you still consider that language, deceased in a sense? Or
yeah, we would call it extinct. So there's another language that has been considered extinct called the Taino. And also the Arawak. Okay, so and the Taino is related to Quisqueya, they call it. That can be double L sometimes. Okay, so Quisqueya is the land of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Okay, also Puerto Rico has similar populations from that time, but we believed that they were completely 100% annihilated. And we had some written words, right? Like what you're talking about. And there's been an effort to revive it. Most of the effort has not been on Quisqueya or the island of Hispaniola, but more on Puerto Rico. But that's what we're trying to do. And there's been some effort to it. In fact, how many people know the singer Juan Luis Guerra? Anybody know him? Yes, okay. So he, in fact, right, talking about the Dominican Republic, right? So one of the things that he did was to take some of that extinct language, Quisqueyano, and he put it into one of his songs. So if you can hear one of his songs, it talks in another language that sounds really foreign, right? It's actually Quisqueyano, and they did that as a way to try and bring knowledge to others that it existed, right? And that it's possible to do something to try and revive it. So one issue the Native Hawaiians ran into in reviving their language was the thinking that they possibly lost some sing-song aspect of it, right? So, let's see, Norwegians talk in a sing-songy accent, we say, So, how are you? Borden, har du det? It's not like Borden, har du det? It's Borden, har du det? They call that sing-songy, right? So there's some belief that Native Hawaiians lost some of that sing-song aspect, although some might still have it. I don't know if you've heard any of that sing-songy in Native Hawaiian language. Have you? No. Okay. You might find it in Niha, but yeah. Okay. So, in terms of language, right? What do you think, the first thing that any of these guys from the Mayagna group experience when they go off to school? Talking kindergarten. Probably the same experience that Indigenous people all around the world have. I'm saying probably. There might be a few instances that's not that way. But what do you think is the first experience they have when they go off to school? Another language. The idea that whatever's being taught is not in their language, right? And that means whoever goes to school gets that new language, or they get it up to a certain point, and they also learn that their language is not a part of that school system, right? So all of a sudden we have that difference there, and just because it's there, we have the potential that it might be lost, right? The native tongue. Okay, all right, so what about the Middle East? We've been talking about Israel, Palestine. What about language there? What do we know about language there? Do we know much about language there? Okay, where did Hebrew come from? It's kind of fun exercise. Long time ago, like maybe it's difficult for us to figure out where it came from, but like how far back does Hebrew go? Boy, it's almost a trick question. Do you know why? Because we have biblical Hebrew, yes? We have Semitic languages, Aramaic, all those kinds of things, but then we have this other weird thing that we call modern Hebrew. Does anybody know about that? We teach biblical Hebrew here. We don't teach modern Hebrew. What's up with that? So we think that at a certain point, spoken, modern kind of form of Hebrew became extinct, we think, right? So there are still aspects of the language located in text, but it had to be revived. And this was, according to some, the part of the work of the Zionist revival and return to the land, was reviving that language. And now we have some weird circumstances because the languages weren't along the same time of the evolution of the rest of society. So all around the world, we have this concept called indigenous. Right? Native. Don't have a word for this in Hebrew. No translation. Yilidi of the land, you can say, but we don't have this term indigenous, which is virtually in every other language, although the Mayagna would say indígena, which is Spanish, right? So you can see some of the languages taken and borrowed, okay? So that's one of an issue. What do we know about the other populations that are there? Do we know how many different populations are there? Pretty fascinating. So at the time that the mandate was established, and in the early 1900s, we had 50 languages being spoken in Israel. Can you believe that? Well, okay, maybe you can because it's a big holy center of the world, right? Okay, so that's pretty significant. Currently, we have Druze, right? Samaritan. I believe neither of them are speaking their traditional tongue. Maybe there might be remnants of it. Okay? Do we know what language they're speaking? Okay, Arabic. Okay. I think they have specific accents. Okay. Then we have groups in Gaza. What are they speaking? Arabic. Accent, though, do we know that? We have an accent here. So we have an Egyptian accent. Maybe that's a proximity thing, right? Just being close. Okay. And then we have what some would call the West Bank or Judea Samaria. If we're talking about the Arabic population, we're going to refer to it as West Bank, right? And we have, I believe, like maybe 10 to 14 different dialect kind of accents here, okay? So we have Syrian, we have Lebanese. Again, my spelling is atrocious. We have Iraqi. We have Kurd. It's just endless. Okay, right? Armenian. Okay, we've got quite a large number of languages being spoken here. Okay. Interesting, I was not aware of how many different accents there were that were being spoken in both the West Bank and Gaza. It was a surprise to me. In addition, I'm told that it represents what is considered tribal populations. Does anybody know what that means? Tribal groups, as opposed to like the Morongo or whatnot. Okay, we would say that it's based in family, clan-based. Okay, so a tribe based in clan and family primarily. So the accents are going to be more geared around those kinds of family and family areas. Okay. Interesting, we have some groups that are speaking Arabic that possibly changed from what they were speaking in their family before. How many people are aware of that? Okay, so we did have some that stayed in Israel that were Jewish and never left, and also changed in terms of their religions, right? And even their language. Okay, so we did have some cultural change that happened with Jewish groups that were now into speaking Arabic and even located in those other political districts. Okay, so we have a real complex thing going on in terms of language in this area. Okay, all right. Now let's talk about land. Hawaii. We had the tribunal, right? 1993. Then we had the apology, right? We had the apology. We got all excited. We said, oh, we're going to use the apology. We're going to use it in court. And first thing we do is we go to the state and we litigate it at the municipal levels, right? The county level. We win or whatever. It's not all cases we won in. But ended up into the Supreme Court level at the state, right? We said, look, President of the United States said this was illegal, right? And they said, can't use that. Why do you think they said that?
They wanted to keep lying.
What would have happened if it was otherwise? If they said, oh, okay, we'll let you negotiate this. What would happen?
They'd have to let other people do it.
So it'd be a precedent setting, right? And not only that, but the control on the geography of Hawaii, nay, all of Hawaii, would be negotiable or up in the air all of a sudden, right? Everything from taxes to benefits, right? How the state cares for its citizens, law. Kind of fascinating how that works, right? So, if we return some of the land, maybe that's enough, is perhaps the thinking, right? So we have something in Hawaii called Hawaiian homelands. How many people have heard of Hawaiian homelands?
Okay.
It's organized under what's called the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. We refer to it as OHA. OHA is a state entity, right? Just like we have other state entities. Okay. And that means that Native Hawaiians have their traditional lands, cultural rights lands, managed by a state entity that's underneath the federal government. Okay, so kind of similar to the trust arrangements under the Bureau of Indian Affairs, right? Bureau of Indian Affairs, well known. We've got a lot of lawsuits against it. OHA, we find very politicized. Okay, we have elections, again, very politicized. Okay, now, not a lot of Hawaiian homelands, right? Percentage of the islands is actually pretty small. I can think of maybe 3-4 areas on Kauai. What about you on Oahu?
I only know
One.
Yeah.
Okay, and I know of one on the Big Island. There might be more. Do you know of more than that? What about Maui?
I don't know any on Maui. I mean, the only one like that's official that I can think of is like Papakura,
Mhm.
but there's a lot out like in Waianae too.
Okay. A lot of the places are, from my understanding, very poor areas. Yes? Same with, yeah, okay. So the land that's being not very good land, right? And in order to get the Hawaiian homelands, you need to have, do we remember what we need to have? Blood, right? How much? I think it's 25%. They've been working on negotiating it, right? And talking about that here on the mainland as well. Okay, 25%, that means if your dad has 25% and he dies and you don't, got to move out. Oh, got it? So this is not lands being held in perpetuity in your family. It's only being held reportedly in perpetuity by the state. Okay. Now, there's some other things that you got to do to get this kind of land. Do you know what else? It's kind of like disgusting when you start to learn about this. Okay, you got to get yourself on a list. Okay, have you heard about this list?
I think so.
Yeah. Last I heard, it was 15 years long. Meaning, average time spent on the list before you get your Native Hawaiian homelands, around 15 years. Some longer. Okay, so that means that there's a lack of places, right? Only so many that they have available. Okay, so this is the situation for Hawaiian homelands. Do you remember how much land was provided for the commoners after we had what was called the Great Mahele, or the division? We had 0.07% that was provided as lands for what we called Makai Nano, the commoners. Okay, that's less than 1%. Okay, now if you don't have that, or if you were not a chief or something, then this is your other route. Okay, all right. This is a fun conversation. You guys enjoying this conversation? Hope so. Okay, so let's look at the Mayagna. The issue of land. Now we remember that the only agreement that came out of the war of the 1980s to the 1990 was an autonomy agreement. Which means you got your ability to rule yourself in terms of laws. Not land, laws. Okay? And then we found quickly after that that there was an attempt at grabbing the land of the indigenous people, right? And so we found we had to write another law. Had to write a law that said, there's indigenous people, they have right to land under international law and your law. So we had to convince everybody to vote for this, to vote for the right of indigenous people to have land in Nicaragua. Eventually they said yes. The first attempt at this, we had a president, his name was President Bolaños, and he said, yes, we'll give them the rights to land, but not to the resources. The heck? How about that, right? Not to the resource, meaning the state can take all the trees, the gold, and the water, and the whatever else is there, but they can own the land, whatever that was going to mean, now that all of it was potentially the state's, right? So we had to go back and rewrite the land law. That land law didn't work. And we had to include the phrase and all the stuff on it, right? Thought that wasn't even necessary. But now, if you look at the UN DRIP, it'll say rights to land and all the resources on it. This is because of these experiences, right? So now we have the right to land, we have the right to all the stuff on it, and there's a process. So we go through a process that we call a diagnostic. And the diagnostic means we're going to go walk around our land claim. We're going to map it. We're going to write down all our stories, right? Write down even songs, history, significant sites there. But in addition to this, there were a couple of extra things that were thrown in here, and you should know that. I mean, is there? Let me know if you see anything. It's potentially going to come, right? When we developed this diagnostic, both the World Bank and Nicaragua said, we want you to include something in here. We want to include a land use map. We want to know how the people are using it presently. And then we want a plan on how it is going to be used in the future. And so they were required to say, this is how we use our land and this is how we plan to use it in the future in order to get land. Wouldn't have gotten title or ownership to their lands any other way. Had to say, and we'll be good to it, right? Had they said, and we're going to cut down the whole rainforest. No way, you're not going to get your land, right? So this was kind of like a last-ditch effort, colonial, post-colonial, if you will, to control what would happen on the land. Okay? Now, the other thing that we did with it, we said it's inalienable. What does that mean?
Unsupportable.
No. Can't sell it. What do you think about that? Should we make indigenous lands unsellable? Can't sell it, ever. Always will be Mayagna lands, right? And because their country doesn't delineate by blood quantum, it'll always be around. See that? Now, we're talking about people that make $800 a year. Now, what do you think is happening? What do you think we're doing with only $800 a year? We're selling it. It's against the law. It's against what we said we wanted. It's against what the whole nation set out for Indigenous people. And now because we're selling it, not everybody, it's illegal. Now because they're selling it, now we have conflict. Okay? Like serious conflict. Like people are gunning each other down kind of conflict. You said I could buy it. Well, it's inalienable. You should have known all the state laws. But you still sold it, right? I gave you money. So that's one thing that's happening right now. We intended it for it to be inalienable, and it's just not really working that way, okay? Part of the reason, how much money is made in a year, right? Just like my friend that said, I want to cut down the trees too so I can send my kids to school, right? Ni'ihau is known, the people that own Ni'ihau are known as land rich, cash poor. This is an example of the same thing, yeah? Okay. You ready? Okay. Israel, Palestine. What's going on with the land? Let's talk Israel first. What do we know about Israeli land? Anybody? Oh, you guys are going to blow your mind if you don't know this. All right. 95% of all the land is owned by the state. How many people didn't know that? Wow, what does that mean? Never can be sold. Okay? So we have a couple of different kinds of understanding about property in the world. We have something called fee simple. How many people know what that is? Okay, no real estate agents here yet. Okay, fee simple, and then we have something that's called lease hold. Okay, now fee simple means you own it outright. That means you can pass it down to whoever you want. You can sell it, you can pass it down to your kids, right? They might have to pay tax on it or whatever have you, but that's what's called fee simple. Leasehold means you can use it for a while, and it may be up to 80 years, or it may be 100 years, but eventually when you've died and that lease comes up, might have gone down to your kids, and then eventually the lease comes up, it's got to go back to the state. Okay? So this is a similar thing to what we've got going on in terms of arrangements where people are living in Israel, right? In areas that are owned by the state. Okay? How many people are surprised by that? Okay. How many people think about, wow, this has got to have some kind of ramification on peace negotiation and land issues? Yes? Big issue. Okay? Okay. Now the other side, we've got not a lot of knowledge about land. We do have some prior to statehood. We have some knowledge of land. Okay. Prior to statehood, we had a traditional land management from the Ottoman Empire. How many people have studied the Ottoman Empire? Did you ever study anything about land? No? Neither of you? No? Anybody else study about the Ottoman Empire? Yes? Remember anything about land?
Not really, just some war. I know there was like a lot of wars that had happened.
Yeah, okay. We had districts. Okay? So that's one thing. So we had districts that were managed by people. And then land use, or land rights, as it were dependent on use. What does that mean? Sounds kind of weird to say it that way, I know, but really, if you didn't lose it, you lose it. Okay? You got to use it. Okay? Another reference that we could use is the rule of collection. How many people have heard of that? How many people have heard of the rule of collection? Okay, so this means that if you collect fruits off of this tree and you continue to collect fruits off of this tree, land, area, whatnot, you have the right to use it. Okay? Then it means if you stop using it, you lose the right. Okay? So that's an issue in terms of what has happened with land use in areas that are claimed by Palestine, right? We also have something else that happened under the Hashemite kingdom. You would think of this as Jordan nowadays, right? Remember, the areas of Transjordan, Israel, and whatnot were all developed by a mandate, right? Borders were drawn. So in the Hashemite Jordanian kingdom, which had jurisdiction of this area that we call the West Bank, right? Had a unique way of dealing with crime. Anybody know about it? There's another one of those things that's going to blow your mind. So the way they dealt with crime was when somebody had wronged another person, the state would award like a repayment of sorts. And the repayment came in the form of land. So the Hashemite kingdom would say, okay, you victim, you see this land over here. The land's yours. This is part of your payment of being a victim. Okay? Problem. Anybody guess what the problem was? Pardon? No, not necessarily. No paperwork. Oh, crap. Are you kidding me? So we've got people here that have thought that they've had rights to certain lands, maybe even around 700 years, because someone said, see that over there, that'll be your repayment. And now we've got an issue with crossing claims, and nobody has any kind of paperwork. How about that? Okay. So to resolve that issue in terms of dealing with it in the state of Israel, we had an unusual thing happen at the Supreme Court. Maybe you saw in my slideshow. Do you know what happened when we came to the Supreme Court with this issue? Supreme Court said, that's all right, you don't need any paperwork or evidence. For reals. No paperwork needed. Didn't say you needed something else. Just said, make your claim. And we'll argue it. Okay? And some won and some lost. And it was more political than anything else. Fascinating how this works, huh? Okay? So part of the issue, or legal pretzel, as it were, that we have in the Middle East is that we have a complete difference of property understandings and evidence and history even. And we have some groups that came in and some groups that left and some groups that, okay, so documentation is a huge problem. And now we're even accusing different groups of making stuff up. Oh, so now it's even worse. Now we got to figure out what's real and what's not real. Okay. Still trying to figure out how to deal with this pickle of the Ottoman land laws. Okay. One of the ways we figured we'd deal with it was to translate it all. Okay. So we've been waiting for the full legal translation of all the Ottoman land laws. Okay. You can look at some of the translations out there, but they're not very thorough. Okay. They don't go to specifics that might give us a little bit of the law of the land. You remember Lex Loci? It's part of our concern. Well, how do we deal with this? Because this was the law of the land first when we were going to return. And we have to respect the law of the land in some regard, but we have to know it in order to do that, right? Okay. All right, so land. All right, what about knowledge? Putting knowledge down here. What do you think we're meaning by here?
With the group that had all the medical knowledge and then we took them and using it without giving them rights.
Okay, traditional environmental knowledge being a perfect example. Another example might be a song, cooking ways, right? This is really all encompassing when you come to knowledge. But look, we could rely on traditional environmental knowledge to start, right? So in terms of traditional environmental knowledge in Hawaii, we had a problem with having the language stopped. So it's possible that some of the knowledge that was encoded in that language may have been lost. But a lot of it has been recovered. Yeah. And so the knowledge itself is beginning to be recovered as well, right? Talking about taro farmers, we believe there were maybe 300 varieties of taro, but all that we could list were 150, so maybe we thought that there were some double names, right? In our study, we came up with 73, which is a pretty healthy third, or maybe around half of the knowledge of the varieties previously, right? The past 300-400 years of contact, okay? So that's maybe if we're generous, we'll say we lost half of the knowledge, or 2/3, or thereabouts, okay? Now, why did we lose the land or the knowledge? Maybe it has to do with the language, but there's also another argument. Do we remember how we lose knowledge about the environment? Yeah? No? No ideas?
For example, here, when groups were moved onto a reservation, their entire land base has changed.
Land got changed,
Your
right?
knowledge based in one particular region, and you're suddenly moved regions. You know, the stuff you know about the waterlands is gonna have no effect in the desert.
Right. So if we're removed from the land, it's a disaster, right? Because then all of a sudden those terms, those knowledge, that the deeply encoded information is completely removed, right? No longer does the O'opukalo have any significance when we can't even grow it or we're not even near the land, right? So obviously those things die off. So a lot of our knowledge will die off. Now, there were some studies that were done in the Southwest, kind of around in this area, with the Papago, Arizona area, and they tested elders, parents, and kids with environmental knowledge, and they found that about 2/3 of it had been lost. And they found that the vast majority of the kids that they interviewed had seen the vast majority of the animals that they knew about only on TV. And the concern was, we're not outside enough. And that includes the native populations as well. And when they're not outside, they're not interacting with the environment, and that means we're losing the knowledge. Right? So knowledge is pretty enormous. So one of the other things that we've done in Hawaii in terms of knowledge is in relation to maritime science. How many people know about what we're doing with maritime science in Hawaii? Did anybody read Kontiki? Tor Heyerdahl in Kontiki, where he was going on a boat of reeds to see if you could actually travel the distance between Rapa Nui and Chile and all these different places. Nobody read this? Wow, I even went to see the Kontiki thing in Oslo. Okay, all right, whatever. So what we're talking about here is knowledge about sailing, right? So we've got a huge effort to rebuild our knowledge of sailing. So there's traditional instruments like a gourd. Do you know about this one? They used to fill gourds with water and use the viewing of it as a way to navigate on their boats, okay, in terms of the stars, different from just looking up, right? Okay. So by this way, we've been checking our traditional navigation. Do we know the name of the boat? Does anybody know the name of the boat? I know you do. Anybody else? Okay, all right, what is it? Hokulea. Anybody else heard about that? No? We just gave an award to Nainoa Thompson. I think he's passed, right? Nainoa? Maybe he's still alive. We gave an award to him for reviving that traditional kind of maritime expertise in science, okay? Knowledge, right? Okay, so the big effort in Hawaii on reviving knowledge. Now, the Maiagna, in terms of knowledge, are racing to preserve their knowledge. Got a lot of it, got a ton of it, passing it down to their kids and everything. Yeah, having issues with the language, but one big effort that they're making is trying to figure out how to pass that knowledge down, okay? And their solution so far is some kind of a museum / university where traditional environmental knowledge is imparted to others in the culture group, right? This is kind of sensitive information too, even spiritual information, things that wouldn't be taught outside of their groups, right? So their effort is to get funding to support these big buildings to bring people from all the territories and to get a chance to study this kind of stuff. Otherwise, you're stuck studying with an expert, which means gotta hope that it's in your family, okay? So we have some experts in terms of medical that would also be combined with spirituality, and we call them Sukya. Sukya, lightly translated, would be maybe a witch doctor or healer, right? And we have those that know the good kind of healing and those that know the bad kind of healing, okay? So we've got a fair amount of this knowledge that's being imparted on a one-to-one basis. So you've got like an apprenticeship that's happening, okay? A lot of women that are apprenticing nowadays. Kind of interesting, okay? Now, knowledge, let's see. Let's go with Arab knowledge. And we're talking about the land, right? Or cultural aspects. Okay, so what do we know about, or what do we think would likely be the case of this group? Remember, we have a group that is kind of very encompassing of a number of others, right? And we have about 800 years that this group arrived and has been present on the land, okay? Got a big variety of populations, though. So we had a lot coming in the 1950s and all the way into the 70s. Okay, so we had a fair new population coming in fairly recently during these 20 years, but prior to that, a good standing presence in the land. So what do you think is going on with the Arab population in terms of their knowledge of the land? Have they been using it? Do we know anything about how they live? We've got some nomadism, right? Some planting going on. More recently, we've got a huge encouragement of agricultural planting. This is both let's try and help your living situation and also, quite frankly, a land grab, because going back to the Ottoman land law, anything that you used was yours. Oh, so we have this weird situation going on, okay? Fair amount of knowledge with 800 years, yeah? Okay, so a lot of the intimate knowledge of the ecosystem has been passed down. Animals, knowledge of animals and plants and vegetation, okay? Of the long-standing population. The more recent population, not so much, right? It's been more urbanized and less focused on environmental reserves and areas like that, okay? What about the Jewish population? We're in the land for over like 3,500 years, right? Some stayed, so we never had a complete 100% leaving of the land, right? So we do have a number that have really, really long, old standing traditional environmental knowledge, but the vast majority came in the early 1900s. And even more recently, too, more recent waves. So you'll have a little bit of the individuals that have a fair amount of long-standing presence and knowledge, but a large majority of the Jewish population not been working the land for the last couple hundred years, 1,000 years, right? So there's been a break in that knowledge as well. And now an attempt to recover it, okay? Maybe some of the ways that we're recovering it is looking back into traditional texts, okay? So did that on one interesting thing. See if I can find something about this. Okay, I'll just give you the images of what I'm talking about. That's the best color. That's the best color, okay? So this is tassels or tzitzit, as it were. How many people have seen people wear these off of their clothes? You seen anything like this? This is supposed to be on all four corners, okay? And for the traditional, we have, this is male primarily, but some women are now starting to do it. And traditional was to incorporate this blue string. Only for many of the past hundreds of years, like, yeah, we'll put a blue string in there, but don't know where it really came from, right? Now, in terms of trying to restore knowledge, there was a big effort made by academics, and what they did is they went back and they found that in the traditional text, it's written that this blue came from a snail. Wow, okay. So what they did then is to go all around the Mediterranean to try and find a snail that had the same color blue. And it took a number of years, but they eventually found the knowledge was still present in some fishermen in the Mediterranean area. And what they did then was to bring it back. And they brought back the practice, and they brought back the knowledge, and they are trying to revive the animal and the species in the area, okay? So a good example of trying to revive that knowledge there, right? Okay? Interesting. Okay. Now, kind of the big top list of 6 main things that we want to look at in terms of cultural survival, right? Okay, I'm going to break actually now that I'm looking at this, these 2 articles that I wanted you to take a look at, and I'm going to go to them. First one here is from 2005. I realize these are dated, but I've got to be honest. You read one of the pieces on the Mayagna that I wrote last week, right? Not that I wrote last week, but last week you read it. And that was from 2014. Not a lot that's been written, okay, especially in the English language. A few news articles about the Mayagna, but really not a lot has been written about them. There's been one survey that we helped co-sponsor with the St. Louis Zoo that did a big book on the Mayagna knowledge of plants and animals. Amazing stuff, similar to that encyclopedia that we talked about, right? But not a lot written. So our articles this week are going to be 2005 and 2007. Here's your first one. How many people remember this conversation about too much land for too few people? Do you remember this? This is what we got when we went with the land claims to the countries, especially Nicaragua, and said, this is what we need. And part of that was in doing the household survey. We had to go door to door to find out, hey, do you bring in any money? Are you employed? How much money do you bring in? In addition to that, aside from the money you bring in, what can you not afford that you get from the forest? So we had to have a household by household record of how much the people depend on the forest based on what they can get from the outside and what they can't and what they use on a regular basis, right? So in doing that investigation, we found, gosh, they're like 75, almost 75% dependent on the forest. They make only about $800 a year. So this is what they need, right? And the government looked at it and said, you're ridiculous, it's crazy. Look at the numbers for Owastingni. They're supposed to be having like 150,000 hectares, right? And there's only 2,000 and something people, right? It's like giving one person like 300 acres. How can we justify that? And they said, it's too much for too few people. And it came back to this kind of an idea, okay? We talked about climate change, right? We talked about growth. We talked about capitalism needing growth, right? How much growth does capitalism need on a quarterly basis? Remember the percentage?
Like 3%.
3%. Got to keep growing, right? So we have this problem where we got to keep consuming, got to keep growing, and we have these issues with climate change, and it comes down to this problem of too much for too few. So then we go back to the question of what kind of lifestyle do we want for all the people in the world? If we're going to have 7+ billion people in the world, what kind of lifestyle ought to be right for human beings, right? The question is different this way, right? Because for this kind of lifestyle, they need a lot of land. And if we have over 7 billion people in the world, the argument goes, that doesn't work. That's what Nicaragua, the state of Nicaragua says. No, that doesn't work. We've got all these other people that we got to worry about. Now what are we supposed to do? And our argument was, hey, this is a cultural survival issue. You don't give these guys land, they're not going to survive, right? Interesting thought, okay? All right, okay, I'll see you on Thursday. Reminder, we'll be releasing the exam on Thursday, okay? So we'll finish up this lecture and then I'll release the exam. We'll go over all the questions if there are any extra questions on the exam, okay? Thank you very much. Yes.
So for the exam, we started on Thursday?
You can?
Oh, so then when do we turn in the paper?
Both on the same day, 24th.
Oh, on the 24th, right? Oh, yeah, okay.
Let's do,
Everything's due on the 24th.
so it's gonna be the exam, right? Final exam.
Yep,
And the essay, right?
yes, yes,
We do the worst.
yes. And